here. So go ahead and open up to the book of Judges in your Bibles. And we looked at this as the purpose statement or the point of the book of Judges. We did this last week. And let's see, Monica's here. Can you read this?
Yeah. The title or the bullet?
The bullet,
okay.
Yeah.
Israel can't remain faithful to God and suffers oppression when it does not have a king God chooses.
Okay. And so how do we change? We did this last week. How do we change those two colored phrases, the gray and the pink, to transport or bring it forward to Christ, talking about how Judges speaks of Jesus? What do we substitute for Israel?
The church.
The church, yeah. And what would we substitute for a king God chooses? Jesus, that's right. Christina's smiling and thinking of squirrels.
The transition.
Yeah, what's that?
The transition.
Yeah. So the church can't remain faithful. So this is a message. And so God is sovereign over all things. He makes history happen without violating the will of people and creatures. But he knows what we want, and he arranges the circumstances, and he puts things before us. And so, you know, if you have a kid and you say, do you want broccoli or would you like this ice cream cone?
Broccoli every time.
Yeah, and so unless it's Bob, you know what your kid's going to say. Now, when your kid takes the ice cream cone, which is what you wanted them to take, you wanted them to take the ice cream cone, and you said to them, would you like broccoli or the ice cream cone? When they take the ice cream cone, have you forced their will? No, you have not. And so that's a little picture of what God's doing all the time with millions of things here in this room and all over the world and all through human history. And so that's why you see, like, if you read the opening 12 chapters of, or, like chapters 3 through 12 of Exodus with Pharaoh, you see that it says both God hardened Pharaoh's heart and Pharaoh hardened his heart, because both things are happening. And you can see in that picture, the ice cream thing, Pharaoh is doing what he wants. He doesn't want to release the people. He doesn't want to admit there is a God of the slaves, who is more powerful than his many gods, or him himself, and he considered himself God on earth. So he doesn't want that. So he hardens his own heart to the idea that there is a real God who will have an effect on him, on his people, on his land, who will humiliate him and bring damage to his land. And so he hardens his own heart. But this is God bringing these circumstances in front of Pharaoh. So he brings Moses, the exiled prince of Egypt, the shamed prince of Egypt, in front of him. And so there's this competition thing going on. God knows how Pharaoh will respond to Moses coming before him. He knows how Pharaoh will respond to the thought of losing all his his free labor force. And so God brings these things in front of Pharaoh. So in that way, he hardens Pharaoh's heart, but Pharaoh himself makes this free response of his own will to say, no, I will not let your people go. Okay, and so that's why we see God saying both things in Scripture. Anyway, so back to this. God arranges all of history, and he arranges all of history in a way that prefigures or shows something about who Jesus is, or what he would do in coming to earth, living his life on earth, dying on the cross, being ascended, reigning over his people for the millennium, and then returning to the earth and reigning over his people in the new earth. Okay, and so the Old Testament, it's always showing something about that. The character of Jesus or the things that Jesus does. And so, just think about Exodus. Does Jesus deliver his people from a kingdom that has them enslaved? Yeah, so work that out. What's the kingdom that has people enslaved today?
Kingdom of the world.
Kingdom of the world, the kingdom of darkness. Who is the prince of the power of the air? Who's the prince or the king of this kingdom of darkness?
Satan.
Satan. So whose place does he stand in that we see in Exodus? Pharaoh. Pharaoh's the enslaving king. And so, when you see Paul saying, you've died to sin, therefore don't submit to it, you can think back to the Old Testament, and what Paul is saying is, you're in the promised land. Why are you listening to the voice of Pharaoh, 1,000 miles away, whose taskmasters are 1,000 miles, whatever that is, 1,000 miles away? They can't harm you. They have no authority over you anymore. And so just like today, when we listen to Satan's temptations, it's like we're an Israelite in the promised land putting together bricks and building things for Pharaoh. It doesn't make sense. We've been freed from our slavery. And so God arranges Old Testament history and brings it about, all showing things that Jesus would do for his people or things that are true of Jesus. Okay, so we see that in the book of Judges, and so that's why we ask this question. How does Judges come forward to today? Well, it comes forward because we need a king to be faithful. And if we're not faithful, our own sins will work to oppress us. Right? Our sins will bring us embarrassment, shame. They'll be found out. We'll lose friends. Maybe we won't get a job promotion because we've cheated or lied or whatever, because we haven't followed our king who said, tell the truth and do all your work heartily as for the Lord. And so if we're following our king, we wind up in these situations of not being oppressed. Now, just understand that with this, there's a Proverbs side of this, and there's a Job, Ecclesiastes side of this. In this world, generally, proverbially, if you do good, you'll be rewarded. If you work hard, you'll get the promotion. If you perfect your skill, you'll be the go-to person at work that'll get recognized. Okay? Generally, that's true. That's Proverbs. Proverbs is saying, do good, and you'll find life, righteousness, and honor. But then we see the Ecclesiastes side of things, the Job side of things, and Job teaches us that if you are the most righteous man on all the earth, which Job was, God says that in chapters 1 and 2, what happens to you? What's the lesson of Job? In this era, on this earth, before the new heavens and new earth, what happens to you potentially if you're the most righteous man on earth?
Crappy stuff.
Crappy stuff. You lose it all. You suffer. And Ecclesiastes is very much like this. Ecclesiastes 8:14. Solomon says at the end of his life, reflecting on all things, says there's something else meaningless on the earth. When the righteous gets what the wicked deserve, and when the wicked get what the righteous deserve, this too I say is meaningless. And so then the next verse there, Solomon says, so enjoy life, work hard, eat your food, and when you get food that you've been able to buy because you've worked hard, enjoy the food. No one can take that from you. And so, we see here that at least in our souls, as we're obeying our King, things are good for us. We may wind up in prison. We may get killed for our faith, but things will be good with our soul. Okay. All right. So that's Book of Judges. We want to look at, as we're looking at this outline. First, we've got faltering conquest. So what's that show us at the beginning of the book?
They didn't follow directions.
Okay.
Well, Judah takes that takes another tribe to go conquer their land, and that's where the conquering stops.
Okay, so what we see at the front of the book is Judah successful in conquering all the land promised to Judah. And Judah takes Simeon along and also brings Simeon in to conquer Simeon's land. And so Simeon and Judah wind up with all the land promised to them. But then the conquest falters. And there's a listing of all these other tribes who can't conquer their land. Okay, so that's faltering conquest. And so then second part of the book, the main part of the book, the thrust of the book is 3:5 through chapter 20. These cycles of oppression. What's happening here?
They fall into false worship, and God sends raiders,
Yeah.
the Oakland Raiders,
Yes.
wolves them up.
Yep.
They got a conquer.
Yep. And so God's people go after other gods. They wind up in oppression to foreign nations, militarily, tax-wise. And then what's God do? How the people respond to this when they see themselves under oppression for years and years?
They cry
Cry
out.
out to God.
They cry out to God, and what's God do?
Sends them a deliverer,
Sends them a deliverer or a judge,
hero.
a hero, a shaphat. That's the word. So Jehoshaphat is God is my judge. That's Jehovah. Shaphat, God is my judge. So Shaphat, he sends them a judge and delivers his people. And then what happens after they're delivered and living in peace for a while?
The judge dies.
Fall back.
The judge dies,
And then
yeah,
go
and they
back
fall
into-
back into false worship. Okay. Sometimes they're falling back into false worship while the judge is still living. Sometimes the judge is leading them into false worship after that initial deliverance. So that's the cycles of oppression. That's the main part of the book of Judges. And then this morning Matthew, we're going to look at this example from this 3:5, and then we'll spend an extended time looking at the end as well. Yeah, Matthew.
With respect to the faltering conquest, it's easy to say, well, they were just lazy, right? But it's really a part of that cycle of oppression in so much as it's disobedience not to conquer that land. Is that correct?
Yes. They're commanded to take the land. And so when they don't, it shows a lack of faith.
Right.
And so, even in the midst of this faltering conquest, their right response would be like the response after they lose the battle at Ai. Remember that in Joshua? They lose the battle at Ai. They've conquered Jericho. They go to Ai, and they get defeated. And what's their response? Yeah, Laura?
They go to the Lord.
They go to the Lord and they said, God, what have we done? And God said, one of you took spoil from Jericho. And roll call. And brings out tribe after tribe. And so this is an appropriate response. When you are disciplined by the Lord, the right response is not, oh, well, guess there's no hope. But the right response is, discipline comes and we say, have I done something? Is this discipline to me? Have I done something unfaithful? And God's delighted if we respond to the discipline and turn to him in faithfulness. And so they turn to the Lord after the battle of Ai, and then God gives them this glorious victory at Ai, and then they go on and conquer all these other places too. After they've learned their lesson, if God says don't take anything from this city, don't take anything from this city. It's important that you obey God and in all the parameters that he gives you as you come to each Canaanite nation there. So the other tribes falter, and they don't look to the Lord to say, God, what's gone on? Or there's not a leader who comes up and says, brothers, we need to believe. God's promised this to us. Let's all believe and go at it again. And so there's a faithlessness that's there. And they don't conquer their lands. Why? Think big picture Judges. What's God teaching in the book of Judges? Why don't they conquer their lands?
They need a king.
They need a king. They don't have somebody in all those tribes who say, brothers. They don't have a Joshua. They don't have a Moses. They don't have, most importantly, a David who says, brothers, God's given us this land. Right? Like David and Goliath. Everyone's saying, oh man, he's really big. I guess we're going to be slaves of the Philistines. And David says, no, God has promised us this is our land, and they're standing in the promised land and threatening us, and beyond that, they're insulting our God. And so David says, brothers, let me fight him. I'll do it. I'll take care of it. That's a king. You know, David's this king. He's just been anointed in the chapter before by Samuel, and that's his first act as king there. And so we don't see that among these tribes, and that is this faltering conquest is testimony that God's people need a king. Someone to gather them, turn them in faithfulness to the Lord, so that the Lord gives them victory and peace and prosperity in the land. So let's go to Judges 3, 12 through 30, and let's read all this and get this sense. It's a real good example for us, and we'll give you a good picture of what we have in the book of Judges. And so let's just go along the front row here, Andrew to Betsy, and then Matt over this way to Jim, and then we'll just zigzag across the back, starting in verse 12, Judges 3:12, until we get to verse 30, and this is about the judge Ehud.
Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel.
Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms.
The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years.
Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, and a left-handed man, the son of Korah, a Benjamite. And the Israelites sent him tribute to Eglon, king of Moab.
Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about 1.5 feet long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing.
He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was very fat. He was a very fat man.
After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way the men who had carried it.
But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence.
Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, I have a message for God for you. As the king rose from his seat,
Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly.
Even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over his
In his belly. Okay, keep going.
Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them.
After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house.
Elated to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw the Lord fall to the floor, dead.
At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not a man escaped.
That day,
Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years.
Okay, very good. A lot of funny stuff there, but a typical progression there. What do we see in this that shows us this progression or this cycle? What's going on first?
Evil in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah, so we see that Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And that's eyes of the Lord versus what? What's the catchphrase or the mantra we have in this? Yeah, people do what's right in their own eyes, which is evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so those are two sides of the same coin. Who's the villain in this passage? Eglon, and he's king of what nation?
Moab.
Moab. And so Moab is one of those nations, and so you got you can look it up in the maps in the back, but so here's Egypt, there's Turkey up here, here's Israel, here you got Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, and then you got over here you've got this land that is also Israel. And so you got Reuben is east of the Jordan, and then you've got Gad is like here, and then you got up here half of the tribe of whom? Yeah, of Manasseh. The other half tribe is over here. And then you've got over here, you've got the Ammonites are kind of here, and the Moabites are here. The Edomites are here. Who are the Edomites descended from? Esau. Yeah, and then you got Ammon here, and you got Moab here, and then up here you've got Aram. So these are all nations, right, that are familiar in our ears. Aram is where Damascus is. Ammon and Moab, bonus points. Whose kids are they? Lot's. They're Lot's incestuous kids. Yeah, remember that? Lot flees from Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife turns around. She's turned into a pillar of salt. And Lot says, oh no, I'm not going to have descendants. And so he has incestuous relationships with his two daughters. And they form the Ammonites and the Moabites. And so God tells us this in the book of Genesis. Why? Okay, a little review test here for.
Well, because Genesis was written to the people right after they came out of Egypt.
Yeah, so Genesis is written to the people coming out of Egypt. They're down probably about right here. This is Midian down here. They're at Mount Sinai, and God is informing his people who have just come out of Egypt who these people are, who they're going to encounter on their way to the promised land. Who are the Edomites anyway? Oh, they're our cousins. Yeah, you have Jacob, that's our father, and then you have Esau. And so God tells them, don't mess with them. Be at peace with them. They're your brothers. Now, the Edomites, they don't treat God's people well. They won't let them pass through the land. And through the history of the Old Testament, the Edomites don't treat the Israelites well. And God takes special offense of that because the Edomites should have been treating their brothers well. When the exile happens, when Nebuchadnezzar tears down Jerusalem, the Edomites are there rejoicing and plundering. And so the whole book of Obadiah is about how God's going to get back at the Edomites, because they rejoiced when their brothers were judged. But the Israelites are going to come across Moab and Ammon, and the Israelites are to know these are our funny incestuous cousins. They're not Canaanites, so we shouldn't destroy them, but we shouldn't join with them either. They're like the people at the family reunion that we're a little embarrassed about, we need to talk to, but we don't want to talk to too long or whatever. Aram was where Abraham had been up here before he came down to the promised land. Anyway, so we got here It's a little weird. Yeah. And so you've got Eglon coming from Moab. Okay, and so he's come in, and he's just on the border, and he comes in, and he invades the land and oppresses God's people. Okay, so when Ehud needs to go back or to pay tribute, that's what's paying tribute. What's the word we use today for paying tribute? Taxes. Yeah, it's taxes that are also a way of showing honor. Now, our taxes don't show honor. We're not honoring our government, but picture Charlton Heston coming in, with his dirty garb before Pharaoh, and all the nations. The nation of Ethiopia presenting you with camels and silks and spices. That's tribute. It's taxes, but it's also showing we bow to you, O king, and give you honor. And so God's people are reduced to giving honor and their money to the king of Moab. So that's what's going on, and what we see in the book of Judges. We see various people. The Philistines are down here. This is Philistia. So we see various nations here oppressing the Israelites during the book of Judges. Okay. So who is sent to give tribute to the king of Moab? Eglon, the king of Moab. Ehud is. And what's Ehud packing? He's packing a knife. What's particular about Ehud? Most people aren't this, but Ehud is. He's left-handed. Where does he put the knife? His right thigh. He pays the tribute. Then what's he tell his companions from Israel after they give all the tax money to Eglon, the king of Moab? What's he tell them? Go ahead. Okay, you guys get a head start. They don't know what he's doing, but he says, "Go ahead home." And then what's Ehud do? Yeah, he says, "I've got a secret message for the king," and so the king sees him, and Eglon fools him because he's right-handed, and so the king's not concerned about his left hand apparently, and Ehud stabs Eglon. And you got this funny scene where, he steals Eglon, and Eglon is huge. Jabba the Hutt, right? Yeah, Matt.
So Star Wars pre-Disney had it right. Because R2 had the lightsaber shoot up out of his head, right? So, and then Luke grabbed it, and Jabba was like, uh-oh.
Yes, that was the left hand.
So Eglon would have been like, uh-oh.
Yes.
Yeah, it was too late.
It was too late. Yep.
And then Luke said, "But I am not left-handed."
And so he plunges this dagger into Eglon, and then goes out the balcony kind of and locks the door and heads off. The guards are outside the door, and what do they think what do they think their king's up to?
Going to the bathroom.
He's going to the bathroom. There may be a smell. And so finally, when it gets to, I love how it puts it there, like the point of embarrassment. What's it say there? They waited, verse 25, they waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he had not opened the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their Lord fall into the floor dead.
These are great details.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
I was just thinking how they're a bit gratuitous, but then you say there would probably be a smell. So just bear with me. So when he stabs him, it's detailed and says that he relieves himself.
Well, they thought he was relieving himself, but
in my version, in my Bible, it says that he's stabbed and everything comes out. So there's a corresponding smell that would support the idea that he's just going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, it seems gratuitous. It seems like these are unnecessary details, but it all helps it kind of fit together.
Yeah.
And he was fat, so clearly he took him a long time to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. So think Elvis here. They're like, yeah, he takes a while, but this is really long. So they finally break in, and they found out that he's been conquered because Ehud, this judge, has gone with faith to free Israel, and so Israel then wins a great victory. So this is a common story taking us from look at verse chapter 4 verse 1 just to complete the cycle there. Bill, can you read that for us? 4:1.
Me?
Yeah.
After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord.
Okay. So there's a cycle. So that's kind of what that looks like. And deliverance by various people. I think 10 of the 12 tribes are represented in the judges. I think there are just 2 tribes that don't have a judge come from them. So it's just people from various tribes are judges over Israel through the book of Judges. God delivers his people from various foreign nations by judges from various people of the various 12 tribes, and they're delivered in various ways, and so detail is given, about different ways God's people are delivered. You got the story of Midian and, the 300 people fighting instead of the thousands, and you've got this where it's just one guy who kills the king and then causes an uprising, and people gain confidence because the king of Moab has been killed, so they rise up and work their freedom again. But typical story there. Okay, let's turn now to our third section of the book of Judges, and this is where we'll spend the rest of our time until quarter after. Chapter 17, verse 1. And so 17 through 21 are all about this anarchy under the Levites. So there's no judge in particular that's mentioned in these last chapters. And you see the condition even of the Levites when there's no king. And so you can ask the question through these chapters, 17 through 21, how are the Levites behaving? Are at least the Levites faithful, but just the people aren't? And the big answer here is no, the Levites are grossly unfaithful to the Lord when they don't have a king. And this is where the mantra verses for in those days Israel had no king and people did what was right in their own eyes. This is where most of them come from, this section. It's a conclusion for the previous section of oppression under the judges, but this gets emphasized here. And then you have this additional aspect in these chapters of the tribe of Benjamin being particularly problematic to Israel. Why would that be important at the time of the writing of the book of Judges? Saul was from Benjamin. And this was teaching most likely to God's people. 1, you need a king. But 2, you don't want a king from Benjamin. So you don't want Saul's son, Ishbosheth, to be your king, which was the case for 10 tribes for 7 years when David was only ruling over Judah. Yeah, okay. Was there a question?
Yeah,
Matt.
I was just going to say, it seems like everybody, even the heroes, make really poor, non-biblical assumptions and actions.
Yeah.
Like this one cat, he just made a promise, an oath to God, give me victory and I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my house.
And he's a good judge, and he makes that stupid vow.
Yeah.
And then who's he have to kill?
His daughter.
His daughter. He's vowed to God to kill the first thing that comes out. What a dumb vow, right? What's going to come out? Yeah, exactly. What's going to come out of your tent?
Maybe a dog.
You know, it's like it's going to be something living that comes out of your tent. And here's the height of lack of wisdom and foolishness, even of the better judges, because was that Caleb or what or Othniel?
Yeah,
Caleb's son, right? Or
but start with
Yeah, fairly early in there. And so, and there's told to us there that then there's this annual festival.
Yeah.
There were people
to commemorate it.
To commemorate.
To this day.
To this day. And so it's telling God's people, if you're in hermeneutics class, this is establishing. It's telling God's people during the time of the writing of this book, here's why you celebrate that festival. It's because you had judges making foolish vows, and people lost their prized daughters when they didn't have a king. And so here's something from your life today. So the writer of the book of Judges is saying, here's something from your life today. You know, every year when we celebrate this festival, it's because when Israel didn't have a king, we ended up making vows that wound up in our own daughters' deaths. Jephthah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and he's a good judge. He's mentioned in Hebrews 11 as being faithful. One of the positive heroes of faith. And so, a judge who has, this positive side to him makes this foolish vow. Okay, on to anarchy through the Levites and Benjamites. And so looking at chapter 17, verse 1, did we got through here? Sydney, did you read? You read, didn't you? So let's come back up to Monica. Let's just start over here. So 17:1, and let's read through this chapter and get a sense of the anarchy, the unfaithfulness going on, even among the Levites.
Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, oops, I read too far.
Oh.
The 1100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it. Then his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son.
Okay. Impressions.
That's modern parenting.
Yeah. Modern parenting. Yeah, this is.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah. Yep. You're a princess. Yeah. What did you say, Jim? You said something.
I said, oh, thanks.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So this is really. We're supposed to see this. That this is really screwed up. A son steals from his mom. It's like Steve Martin, I think, on his first comedy album, Let's Get Small. He said, I'm so tired of my mother. So she calls me, she's elderly, she calls me up the other day and she says she needs money for food. That's a joke. But this is a guy who steals money from his mother. And then he returns it and she says, bless you, my son. So these are what people could expect this is the kind of behavior you could expect under the judges. A man stealing from his mother. But wait, it gets worse. Let's go on.
When he returned the 1100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol. I will give it back to you.
Okay, impressions.
What? Why?
Yeah. And so, whoops, she got the first commandment right, she wants to honor the Lord, right? But how's she do that? She gets what commandment? Second commandment wrong. She makes a carved image. Yeah, exact language from the second commandment of what not to do. I'll make a carved image and a cast idol. Okay, next verse.
So he returned the silver to his mother, and she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith who made them into the image and the idol. And they were put in Micah's house.
Okay, so idols, and personal idols to put in your own house. Where were God's people supposed to go and worship?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, the tabernacle. They were supposed to go and worship. Almost not Jerusalem yet, but at the time of writing, yes. At the time of writing this book. But they're supposed to go somewhere to worship the Lord and to not have idols there at that place. But instead, you have the opposite. I'm just going to worship the Lord privately in my own house.
Church on TV.
Yeah, so it's church on TV. It is Lucky, right? And King of the Hill. I worship God wherever I am.
Maybe they have a personal relationship with God.
Yeah. And that kind of gets into it. Our very American, independent, personal, private. I think my faith is a very private thing, right? Or I have my own relationship with God. Right? God and I have our own thing going on. You know, and no, our faith, though it's a personal thing for us, it's very public. Okay? We worship in public, and we're called to public worship. We're called to proclaim our God in the world as well. But this is personal worship with an idol, you know, so all kinds of violations going on here. Okay, let's go on.
Let's see. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod, and some idols he had installed one of his sons as a priest.
In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit.
You think? Right? So what's the next step that we see there in verse 5?
It's like he's setting up his own religion.
Yeah, he's like setting up his own religion. It's like, you know, when you go and like to a Buddhist temple or a Buddhist area, and you've got the, you know, the Buddha and all the candles and the incense and that kind of thing. You know, there's this shrine that's set up, and then what about this priest? He makes his son a priest. Now, who is he? What's his tribe? Ephraim. Yeah, verse 1. This is an Ephraimite saying, I'll just assign as priest whoever I want. And I'll indicate, you know, a little nepotism, a little favoritism here, and I'll make my son a priest. Now, what's wrong with that? Yeah,
Who is he?
He needs to be a Levite, and not just a Levite, but in order to be priest, what? Yeah, a descendant of Aaron. So Aaron's a Levite, and only the sons of Aaron can be priests. Not the daughters of Aaron, and not the sons of any of the other Levites can be priests. They can be Levites, they help the priests. But you can only be a son of Aaron, a descendant of Aaron, to be a priest. And so, you know, it's you can't get the senior discount unless you're 55. Okay? Sorry. I know you're a great guy. I know you can really drink coffee, but you're only 42. So you don't get the discount. And we don't say, how unfair. No, we say, it's just, these are the rules. You know, it's, why do you get a discount when you're 55 and you're still working? I don't know. It's just, they want you in. But those are the rules. And so that's the deal. So this is being, you know, disobeyed as well. Anybody's a priest, right? And anybody can ordain a priest, right? And so just get your certificate of being a minister online so you can marry your friend.
You can marry your friend without being a priest.
Do the ceremony for your friend and serve as the efficient. Yes, the efficient. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, all kinds of stuff going on here. Let's keep reading. Emily.
Yeah,
Or no, Bob.
A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living within the clan of Judah,
Jim. 8. Yeah.
8.
Yeah.
Left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim.
Okay, so just review. Here's a picture. We're in Ephraim. So Ephraim is here. Okay, so we're in Ephraim here. Here's Jerusalem for your reference. And so this priest, or this Levite, sorry, is living where? Okay, in Bethlehem. Okay, so here's Bethlehem. Okay, so this is Judah here. Bethlehem's here. Jerusalem's just on Benjamin, Judah border here. So, and this was Bethlehem. That was right for him to be living in Bethlehem. The Levites were given towns all over the Promised Land. But he wanders from his town and he heads up into Ephraim, and he comes to Micah's house, where this shrine is, where these idols are in the hill country of Ephraim, which is on this side, near the Jordan River. Okay, next verse. Bill.
Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem, Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay."
And Micah said to him, "Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes, and your living." And the Levite went in.
Okay, so Micah, who is this homeowner here with the shrine, sees the Levite, and what's he want the Levite? What's his proposition here to the Levite? Be my priest. Could this Levite be a priest? No, he was a Levite, not a priest. And what entices him to be a priest? Money. Yeah. So this is Levite for hire. Where were the priests and Levites to get their money from and their living from, their food from? Ministering in the tabernacle, or later then at the time of writing in the temple. They were not farmers. Why were they not farmers, the Levites and the priests?
They had other things to do.
Yeah, and what were the other things that they were to be devoted to do?
Worship.
Okay, so Levites and priests are devoted to the worship of God. And God says, I'm not giving you any land because I don't want you to spend your time farming. I want you to spend to devote your working hours to the worship of me. That's your job in Israel. All the other tribes are going to farm land. And he says to the Levites and the priests within the Levites, don't farm land because I'm going to feed you with what? Literally, what's God going to feed the Levites and priests with? Sacrifices, so they're going to get plenty of meat. And what else? Yeah, fellowship offerings, grain offerings. So they get all this grain, they get all this meat, and then as well, what's something else that God's people bring, the other 12 tribes, or the other 11 tribes bring to the other 12 tribes, because you have Ephraim and Manasseh. What do they bring besides grain and meat or animals into the... Yes, that's right, tithe money. Okay, so they bring in money for the Levites. And so Levite was not to be for hire. And God said, I don't want you working so that your attention is split between helping my people worship me in the tabernacle or the temple and also having to farm. Sorry, I can't help your worship. The crop's ripe. It's harvest time. I'm out this week because I got to harvest the field. God said, no, not for you Levites. I'll provide for you grain. I'll provide for you sheep and goats and bulls, all that kind of meat for you to eat. And your family can share in with this for you. And so you're going to be completely taken care of. You're going to have money. You're going to have meat. You're going to have grain. Yeah, bread. Yeah.
So when Israel's doing this wrong, the Levites are getting gypped, and so they gotta prostitute themselves. They gotta find meaning somehow. So
yeah. And so it's a vicious cycle.
It's a sick cycle.
Yes.
If there's no king, isn't the king commanding the law?
Yes.
And then this is just ignorance right here.
Yeah.
But it's also how did it derail this poorly to this extent where Micah's oh man, God's gonna be so good to me, now I got this Levite.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
How did it get to that point to which they were so far away? And how do these people have access to the law?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Deuteronomy 17. Think back to that. What does the king get that only the Levites and priests have? The law. He has his own copy of the law. He's to write his own copy of the law, and he's to read it all the days of his life. And so this is the point. This is how badly you get off if you don't have a king to lead you who knows the law and leads the people in it. And that was the chief thing for the king. He was the one to make sure the priests, the Levites were doing their job, that the temple was up and running, that it was in good repair. He was the one who called the Israelites together for the festivals and for the temples. And if there were crises in the nation or crisis that came up on the nation, he called God's people together and said, let's cry out to the Lord. And so you see this in the history of the kings, like in 2 Samuel and the 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st Chronicles, 2nd Chronicles. These faithful kings that are sons of David call the people together when foreign nations come in, or and say, God, rescue us. So you see it with Jehoshaphat and Asa and some other faithful kings. Or you see Josiah and Hezekiah. They become kings and the temple's in disrepair, or the doors are shut and nobody's reading the law, and they don't even have a copy of the law with them. And then they open the doors of the temple and they instruct the people, give, we're going to rebuild, we're going to repair the temple. And they have to, like Hezekiah at the end of I'm going to say like Second Chronicles 29, he calls all the people, give to this. And Hezekiah, as the people give, he has to tell the people, stop giving. We have enough money now. And he leads the people in faithfulness to the Lord. And so that's the picture of the king. The king is the worship leader. And he's not, that doesn't mean he's leading the music. The priests and the Levites are providing music in the temple, in the tabernacle. But the king is the one who calls the people to faithfulness to the law, and that includes the part of the law that deals with worship. And so what we see here is that even the Levites get it wrong when there's no king. And so you have that statement inserted right in there, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In those days, Israel had no king. Okay, question, and then we break.
Well, I was just saying, Aaron couldn't even make it 40 days without saying, sure, let's make an idol.
Right.
I'll do worship with that for you.
Yeah, and Moses is kind of king de facto, as Joshua then is kind of king de facto, but then God establishes a permanent king in David later. But you see that Israel's history is filled with this constant strain from God without a king. So it's important in the church that we recognize Jesus as our king and king with law for us, that guides us in worship, that guides us in who we ordain, that guides us in how we live our lives. And if we lose that and we say, I don't have a king, and it's all just up to me, and I can do what's right in my own eyes, or I can do what the nations are doing, right? The nations all have priests from anyone, right? And so if I do that, then I'm unfaithful, and God's, the covenant curses start to come on me. And so it's important that we recognize that Jesus is our king, and Jesus leads us in faithfulness. And part of the blessing of having his incarnation recorded in the 4 books of the Gospels is we see how the king lives. And we get an example, and he leads us by his example of how you live your life. Let me close in prayer, and then if you have questions, come on up after that.